Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. It is Thanksgiving today. It is Thanksgiving 2024, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. Thanksgiving's a special day. I have a story about Thanksgiving. I used to live in New York and like upstate New York. And every time, we'd take the train to the city a lot because it was just super convenient. And one of my favorite things to do was take the train to the city on Thanksgiving Day and see the parade. And I remember one Thanksgiving, we were just walking around. I was just like chanting around New York City. And I was like, man, I really want to go to the parade. I really want to sit in the bandstand. I think that's what they call it. And so it was like my intention as I was chanting, which is not a good intention when you're chanting. But for whatever reason, it was on my mind. And somebody just walked up to us and handed us like their bandstand tickets. And I was like, Krishna miracle, I got these bandstand tickets. So we went. And I'll tell you, it was like the coldest day in Thanksgiving history. You're just like sitting there freezing, like really badly wanting to have fun and like having like the best time ever, but at the same time, like being so freezing cold that it was one of those scenarios of like, you pray, you think you know what you want materially, you pray for it, that it's like, this is not at all what I thought. It was just like counting down the hours until it was done because it was so cold. Couldn't feel my toes, couldn't feel my fingers. But now, I checked it off the list. It's happened. Sat in the bandstand. Grandstand. Is it grandstand? Bandstand? I don't know. They have some for those bleachers that are like right next to the beginning of the parade. That's where we were. So anyway, every time Thanksgiving rolls around, I think of that story and how I really thought I knew what I wanted. I was so convinced this was going to be the greatest thing ever. And then it was like pretty much a letdown. So now I think today I'll watch it from the comfort of my warm couch. But I do love the parade. It's so festive and fun. And in New York City, the energy is just like, it's incredible on the parade day, but it'll be wonderful from my couch. So anyway, that's my Thanksgiving Day story. Today, though, something even more exciting is we are finishing chapter 2 of our Gita, of our journey through the Gita. So we just have this one last verse left, the very last verse of chapter 2. We just finished a pretty hefty section that we spent a lot of time on, where Arjuna asked Krishna the characteristics of a perfected yogi. And Krishna gave us a beautiful explanation to this question with so many lessons that we've learned and talked about and related to our lives. And now we're at the very concluding verse of the section and of the chapter. And then I thought after we finish that verse, we just go through some of the key themes from this chapter, just because there's I think maybe about 4 or 5 sections in this chapter, but we'll go through and talk about some of the key themes in each of the sections, and then maybe we'll have a little check-in with everyone. So with that, we will start with 272. And 272 says, this is the longest chapter of the Gita, by the way. This is like the biggest, this is the Everest of the Gita. 272 says, that is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter into the kingdom of God. So this is the conclusion of this section and of the entire chapter. What is the ultimate destination of someone who is self-realized? Such a person is spiritually situated and not bewildered. A person who's not bewildered at death achieves perfection. That's what Krishna is saying here. And this can happen within a second, or it can take millions of births. So it's different for everybody. Oh my gosh, chapter 18 is the longest. You're right. This is the second longest. Thanks, Narayani. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Okay, so a person who is not bewildered, okay, this can happen in a second, or it can take millions of births, but one must come to this realization. And that in material life, there's activities of sense gratification. And we've talked about that pretty extensively, especially in this section. We've talked about that extensively. In the spiritual world, there are activities of Krishna consciousness. And we talked about the difference between the two, that we just had a verse in the last section, 69. I think it talked about what's night. What's night for the spiritualist is day for the materialist. How there's the polarity there between the two. So the recommendation for us is spirit plus ritual. This is how we get spiritual. Right? We talked a lot about this theme as well, how the essence of bhakti is really the intention and the heart behind what we're doing. And we do have these practices and this path, but it's empty if we don't have the heart and the intention behind what we're doing. So the key is the right spirit. Spirit plus ritual, spiritual. Both are important, but the key is the right spirit behind it, or it's empty. And that's the difference between religion and spirituality, is when religion becomes ritualistic just for social or political reasons, it's no longer effective for transformation of the heart. And that's what we're all trying to do here, right? Upgrade our consciousness, transform the heart, develop a real relationship connection with God. So that's the point of this chapter. And really this whole text, this is what it's trying to teach us to do, transform the heart. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so a really well-known saint in our lineage, has summarized this chapter as being the contents for the whole text. So this is a really important chapter. I think it's called Gita Summarized, something like that. Now I'm going to check everything, contents of the Gita Summarized. I'm going to check everything I say offhand to make sure that I'm not stretching here. But okay, so let's go over just some of the important sections in this chapter. We'll go through, I've chunked out the chapter into like 4 or 5 sections, and we'll just talk about the main message in each section as we walk through it chronologically. Right? So the first 10 verses, Arjuna was still in his agony. He was still trying to decide if he wanted to fight. And he got to the point where he just really didn't know, and he was really confused. And if you remember in chapter 1, we went through all the reasons why he didn't want to fight, right? He had compassion for his relatives. He was afraid of what it would mean for future generations, if the traditions would be lost. He was afraid about right? This was a lot of chapter 1. We talked about all the circumstantial reasons. Finally, in 2:7, this is like one of the transition points of the Gita. He gets down on his knees and he says, I'm confused. I've lost all composure in my miserly weakness. Tell me for certain what is best for me. I'm your disciple and a soul surrendered to you. Please instruct me. This is the first question of the Gita. There's 17 questions in the Gita. This is one of the first. Well, this is the first, where he's just like surrendering to Krishna. And in this verse, this is kind of the beginning of the transition of the Gita, right? Because up until this point, there's been so many circumstantial reasons, and discussion has been happening about why he shouldn't fight. But now it's going to transition to universal principles. That's what's kind of happening here. And it's important to note that Arjuna doesn't ask Krishna, should I fight or should I not? He's not seeking an answer only to his specific dilemma. He asks Krishna, really, what is dharma? What is the right thing to do? That's what he's trying to figure out here. And that theme kind of continues through the Gita, even into his next question, when we see in chapter 2 at the Krishna, the characteristics of a perfected yogi, how a perfected yogi walks, talks, engages their senses, all of these things. Would this kind of person fight? So he's trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. And also when he does this, the other beautiful part about this kind of transition in 2:7 is that he changes the dynamic of their relationship. So before, Krishna's his charioteer, he was his driver, and Arjuna's the warrior, and they're friends. But now it's transitioning to where Arjuna's the student and Krishna's the teacher, and Krishna's going to instruct him. And so it's kind of like a beautiful shift, in this relationship dynamic, as Arjuna's now like, okay, I'm ready to be instructed. I've exhausted all of my efforts, all of my intelligence. I don't know what the right thing is here. So please tell me. And this happens at the beginning of the chapter in 2:7. So then we see a few verses later, 2:10, Krishna's this is where Krishna smiles because he's seen, okay, let's do this. I'm ready to do this. Krishna's on board. He's ready to give this universal knowledge, and he sees kind of the potential here. So that's the first 10 verses into chapter 2, kind of going through Arjuna's agony, and then Arjuna's surrender, and then Krishna's buy-in. And then from 11 to 30, this next section is talking a lot about the soul. We learn about the characteristics of the soul. This section, it's like a grief counseling session. It's a message of hope and positivity. This is where Krishna's teaching Arjuna, the wise don't lament, either for the living or for the dead. And there's no essential difference. He talks in this section, 2:11 through 2:30, about how different the soul is from the body. Where Arjuna is worried about killing his elder's brother, Krishna shifts Arjuna's focus to their souls. He says the body is born and is gone today or tomorrow. Therefore, the body is not as important as the soul. And this is the section where we learn what real knowledge is. This is a theme we talked about a lot in this section. What's real intelligence? Does anybody remember what real knowledge is defined by the Gita? What real intelligence is? Pop quiz. If anybody wants to.
Being able to engage in Krishna's service.
That's a good answer.
Okay. But that's not what it is.
But that could be like a subsidiary. Is that how you say that word? Maybe. But it's a difference between the soul, between matter and spirit, and the controllers of both.
Okay.
So it's understanding what is matter, what is spirit, and what is their relationship, and who controls them. And in that, we also talked about the difference between the soul and the Paramatma. The soul and the Paramatma, you could also use the word super soul for Paramatma. Does anybody remember the difference between the soul and the Paramatma? This is another thing that you'll see reoccurring come up. Fun trivia question. Difference between the soul and the super soul? Soul and Paramatma.
The soul is us and Paramatma is Krishna in the heart.
Yeah, perfect. And they're both in there. And we talked about that analogy with the birds, the two birds in the tree. Our soul, we're the bird that's kind of eating the fruits on the tree, enjoying the fruits. And the Paramatma, the super soul, is just watching, kind of waiting for the soul to turn back. Because we're off busy enjoying. But the super soul never leaves us. And it even travels with our soul and our subtle body when we transition to the next body. The super soul is always with us. Isn't that so beautiful, right? Like the super soul never leaves us. You think about all the relationships we have in our lives and how, temporary they can be and how conditional they can be. I mean, even a good marriage, it's like there's still some conditions in there. Not that that's bad, but this is just the way of the material world. But the soul, the super soul, never leaves us. We can't do anything to make God turn away from us. Isn't that amazing? So that's a nice theme in this section as well. And the other theme, the Gita is saying that the journey of the soul is eternal. It's eternal. Death is not a comma, or death is a comma. It's not a full stop. It's not a termination. It's a transition. We talked about that, how the soul finds different bodies depending on its desires and its karma, right? The deeds that you've done in this life, the way that you've operated in this life, you'll find a body that's suitable to that in your next life. And so that's the journey of the soul. There's no beginning, there's no end. It just continues and it finds another body. And in this, we talked about how the body is important and it's a vital resource, but it is identity. It's not our sole identity, the body. It's very temporary, just like a dream. And in the bodies, we have our ego conception of who we are. And our behaviors are governed by that, governed by our underlying fears. And based on the environment we're entering, we put on a different mask to protect us. This is the way the ego works. And this is the material body. And then we become so attached to those masks that we can't give them up. And then the soul gets entangled in these masks, right? And the soul becomes overwhelmed by these fears, and the soul becomes dragged into this sense gratification, right? The sense objects, the senses, the mind, they can all influence the soul. But right next to the mind is the intelligence. And if we can purify the spiritual practices, the intelligence can uncover the soul, uncover all of this conditioning, this material conditioning, and the intelligence can influence the soul. And that's why we engage in these spiritual practices in these classes. This is why we're here now. So this is this section of the Gita. These are some of the teachings that we learned in this section of the Gita, 211 through 230. And in this section, Krishna removes Arjuna's fears by describing the different qualities of the soul. If you remember all those qualities, there's a lot of them, like I think 220. It's a good list of qualities. But Krishna explains that compassion Arjuna is showing is only for the body. And he's saying, where's the compassion for the soul? He explains that Arjuna is only loving the externals, but not really connecting to the soul. And therefore, compassion is not really that deep. And that true love is understanding the person behind the mask. This is a theme we've talked about a lot this week too, is trying to love a person not because of their ego, not because of their mask, not because of the way that they satisfy our ego, but because they're a part and parcel of God, right? Just like we're a part and parcel of God. So maybe trying to love ourselves as that, right? Not loving ourselves because we do this right, or we're good at this, or we get the approval of that person, right? Or we've, lost this much weight, whatever it is. Not loving ourselves because of that, but loving ourselves because we're part and parcel of God, right? Something that's eternal, something that's enduring. And in that way, learning to love others for the same reasons. And in that way, the relationship becomes centered on God and it becomes enduring. The relationship becomes enduring. And this is what we're working towards. We've had some nice discussions on the thread this week around this too, developing this kind of godlike love, like you would love your child, no matter what they do, regardless of their ego, whatever it is, we just love them unconditionally. We just love them. Can we have that same love for ourselves? Can we have that same love for the people around us? This is what soul conception can do for us if we can really imbibe it, if we can really realize it. And that's true love, understanding the person behind the mask, understanding the person behind the ego, that they're part and parcel of God and they're a soul, and at their essence, they're full of love, full of joy, full of compassion. Lamentation is a symptom of the bodily conception of life, and Arjuna was lamenting at the skin level, but not at the soul level. So this is this section 211 to 230. The soul is indestructible. The body is inevitably destructible. So if we can buy into this idea that we're the soul, we become fearless. And in this, Arjuna should not give up his duty as a Kshatriya. Those are the high level lessons there in this section. We learn a lot about the soul. And then we move on to the next section, 31 through 37. 31 through 37, where we learn material reasons to fight. Krishna tells Arjuna of some material reasons to fight. So the next two sections, first is 31 through 37, and then the next is 37 through 53. One is material reasons that will bring about auspiciousness for fighting, and the other is spiritual reasons. So the material section is relatively short. It's just 7 texts. And the overall lesson that we can take from this section is the importance of sticking to the nature that we're born with, because that is the way to reach the soul level and therefore the true path to happiness. So basically, like, you can't be anybody but yourself, whatever your nature is. If you're a carpenter, if you're a baker, if you're a teacher, if you're, whatever is conducive to your nature, that's how we have to engage our senses. And there's no way out of it. To bring ultimate happiness and fulfillment to your life. And so when we talk about going back to this knowledge of the soul and how that's our real identity, we acknowledge in that most of us aren't to the point that we've realized that. Just in our everyday lives, most of us aren't to the point where we fully realize that. And that's why this point is important about acting in accordance with your nature, because we can't just fake being there. It just doesn't work like that. It's a process. It takes time. It could take one lifetime, many lifetimes, millions of lifetimes. So there's a step-by-step process that's outlined for us in the Gita to help us get there depending on where we are, so that we can find fulfillment and happiness with where we are. And part of this, the beginning of this process, is this point to act in accordance with our nature. And we can't artificially try to be somebody else, or we'll be putting on more and more masks rather than removing them. So happiness, we can get this happiness by acting and living in accordance with our nature. And then Krishna's pointing out to Arjuna that he can't be kind to others until he's kind to himself. And this is a point we've talked about a lot as well. We do injustice to others when we're dissatisfied with ourselves. Right? We hear that hurt people hurt people. So it's like, get your stuff together first. Figure out what engages you, what's stimulating to you in this life in terms of your dharma, and engage your senses in it. And eventually Krishna's going to say, whatever that is, offer it to me, and that's the process. But for now, it's just engage your senses in whatever it is that's in accordance with dharma. That you're not hurting anyone. It's benefiting society. We don't want to. You can't really just say like, well, I'm a butcher, or something that's maybe not really, that's harming other people or other living beings. We don't want to be there, but we have to figure that out for ourselves, so that we're working in accordance with our dharma if we want to get that kind of circumstantial happiness, which is important at our beginning stages, because we're not realized souls yet. So he says that. However, he says this isn't the highest truth. We have to understand that we can't depend too much on the results of our nature or become too attached, because this can bind us also, because this is all temporary. The perfect dream job and you're engaged beautifully, it could be taken away from you. And it probably will be sooner than later. So we have to understand, we have to have this in perspective. We have to understand that this is a process of purification. And while we do our best, to situate these things so that for the most part in our daily lives, we're getting some satisfaction and some happiness out of the way that we're engaging our senses, we have to understand that it's not the know-all. And in the next section, Krishna will explain how this is not the deepest level of satisfaction. So he explains how this is just a stepping stone, such that we engage according to our natures, but we're not bound by it. And he teaches us how to not be bound by it. With the goal of all of this is ultimately to get realization of the self. That's where we're going with this. And it's a process, and these are stepping stones. So that's kind of the highlight of this section. And now we're on to the second to last section, which is the spiritual reasons to fight, 37 through 53. This is where we talked about karma kanda. Karma kanda being that like transactional relationship with God, where you pray for things or you do certain rituals to obtain certain outcomes from God. It's that kind of relationship where you're still aspiring after material things, and you still think what's best for you. So you're praying for these things or doing rituals so that then hopefully God will fulfill them. That's karma kanda. And then we talked about the difference between karma kanda and karma yoga. Karma yoga is just offering everything to God. So however you're engaging your senses, whatever work you're doing as an offering to God. So if you're a baker, you're baking things, offering them to God. and then maybe selling them or eating them, or, you know, if you're a mother, you're raising your child with that consciousness that your child, that you're a servant of God, and your child is entrusted to your care to raise and to love and to nurture on behalf of God, right? You're just, they're not yours. You don't possess them. Right? We try to cultivate that kind of consciousness. If you're a businessman, if you make lots of money, maybe you give your money to a good cause that serves God. Right? So whatever it is that's driving you, that's conducive to your nature, you find a way to offer to God. And in that way, we practice this level of detachment. You know, we start to understand that we're not the proprietor. And we start to kind of shed layers of the ego in that way. It becomes less about us and more about God. God's the center. How can we serve the center instead of be the center? So in this section, we talked about the waves of material existence, ups and downs. We've talked about this so many times, the ups and downs of material existence. We're happy, we're distressed. We get some accolades, we get some, you know, people think good things of us, and then we get some criticism. You know, we make some money, we lose some money. Whatever it is, this is the material cycle that we experience day after day. We wake up, we're happy about some things, we're sad about some things. And we talked about how the cause of distress is not being at the bottom of that cycle, but if you really zoom out, the cause of distress is being caught in that cycle, caught in the ups and downs. And the best way to avoid distress is to get out of that completely, right? Get out of this upending cycle. And for that, we engage in this karma yoga. We dedicate, we work in a mood of detachment, offering the fruits of our labor to God. And that's the process here. Because as long as we're in that ups and downs, in that karma kanda-like mentality where we're wanting this set of material life and not getting it, being upset, angry, distressed, and then we, you know, say, oh, we fix our eyes on something else and say, okay, this will make me happy. I know now this will make me happy. And we get so focused on that. You know, as long as we're in that kind of pattern, that kind of hamster wheel, we're missing out. We're kind of stuck in the laws that are governed by karma, which is for every action, there's an opposite, there's another reaction that I'll experience. You know, if I put selfish behavior out there, I'm going to get that back to me. You know, what the kind of how karma works. So if we can get out of that whole cycle, that universe, and be immune to it, we won't even get reactions from what we do if we are offering it to God in that selfless, loving way, in a mood of surrender. So those are the lessons from that section. And then in the very last section, the one we just did, 54 to 72, this is the second question of the Gita, where Krishna asks Arjuna, what are the characteristics of a perfected yogi? How do they engage their senses? How do they restrain their senses? What are their key characteristics? How do they move about in this world, navigating the ups and downs? This was a beautiful section that we spent a lot of time on, talking about many relatable lessons for us all, because it's a good description of these realized souls. And it's a good kind of prescription for us to try to aspire to some of these qualities and some of these ways of being. And the two of the big things we learned from this section is that it takes both sense control, right? Regulation of the senses. We talked about boundaries a lot in this. And then also redirecting our consciousness to God. And we talked about so many different ways to do that. So this is kind of the summary of chapter 2. Do you guys remember a lot of these points? Does anybody want to share anything here? Or Narayani, if I said anything that was off, please correct me, or anybody. But it shouldn't be, because I do check my sources pretty. I super appreciate the summary. Thank you. Great. Oh, I wrote that as a private message. Oh, that's sweet. That's okay. It's good for the ego. You know, we mess up sometimes. It's okay. It's okay to mess up. All right. Anybody want to share a point that they loved from this chapter? Or, oh, Maria's on. Maria, I haven't seen you yet. Good to see you. Anything at all?
I will. I
Oh,
love,
wonderful.
I've got so much going on in my life right now with family and things that I can relate to with this chapter. But one thing that really sticks out for me always is the concept of sense gratification and how we're sort of just a slave to our senses. And I'm struck by every day I'm starting to notice more and more when I'm doing that, checking my intention behind what I'm doing. And quite often it's just to satisfy the senses. So I've really appreciated that distinction and that awareness in my life. It's allowed me to get some control over that. And I'm just noticing for how long I spent completely unaware that I was just being, what is it? I don't know if we've talked about this one with the senses being the horses of the chariot and how they were just going out of control. But that's really struck home for me lately. Yeah, so much I could
Yeah.
say, but I just want to talk about that.
That's beautiful. And it's also so nice to know too, right, that as drawn as we are by our senses, that's just our material body and it's natural, it's normal. Like that's
Yeah.
the default condition of our material body is that we're going to be pulled by our senses. So if you're pulled by your senses, if you're experiencing that like 2 a.m. call to the refrigerator in the middle of the night, that's normal. Know that that is normal. But it's what can we do about that to purify our senses so that we can purify the soul and ultimately uncover the soul. And that's all the tests that we get throughout the day is how can we better regulate our senses so that we can purify the soul.
Yeah,
Not
it's
so that
given
we
me
can,
more.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's given me more
please.
freedom for choices. And I have consciously sometimes chosen in the moment to allow myself a little bit of sense gratification, but the difference is I know what I'm doing and when I'm doing it. And I really appreciate that, like, okay, I'm really enjoying this little piece of candy or whatever right now, but I know this isn't the long-term happiness. I know that I can redirect my senses towards God whenever I'm truly feeling unfulfilled. And I'm really grateful for that distinction in my life. A little bit
Oh,
more freedom, a little bit more clarity.
that's so beautiful. Yeah, because it's not even about turning off the sentences because that's not really realistic either. We will get some enjoyment from our senses, but it's knowing those boundaries where they're about to take us off course. They're about to make our car stumble off the road and roll a couple times that it's going to be difficult to get back up. It's knowing where that boundary is in our senses and better controlling it. And the other point I was going to make about the senses is we do this not so that we can, have the perfect body, lose the weight, be super disciplined in our workout regimen so that we can, be beautiful people that can be more powerful and more satisfaction from the senses. No, we do this so that we can take care of this vehicle so that we can use it in service to God. And that's also such a shift in the consciousness. And you'll realize if we can shift that consciousness, it even comes with more love and compassion for ourselves and people around us, rather than just an ego-centered consciousness around trying to control some of these things. Beautiful. Thank you.
I think my biggest takeaway from this
Share with
chapter,
us.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think my biggest takeaway from this chapter is like,
Oh, this is Mariah. Sorry. Mariah.
it's just like accepting where you're at, but also like doing the practice isn't, it's not something to restrict us. It's something to reawaken our true identity. It's like I think growing up, I used to always think like, oh, okay, I can't engage in those things. And it was like such taboo. And the way we've like learned it here, it's like, it's not that it's like a taboo. It's just like, those are the things that aren't going to awaken your consciousness. They're going to dull your consciousness. And these are the things that are going to awaken your consciousness. And you get to choose. Do you want to awaken them, or you do not want to awaken them? And it's more of like, it's more of that type of mentality rather than like, oh, I think a lot of religions, or like just being a kid, you're taught differently. It's like, oh, you're going to go to hell if you do these things, and you're going to be bad if you do these things. But to put it in that perspective of like, no, just engage in these activities. If you want to feel connected with God, yourself, your source, if you want to be self-realized, and naturally you won't want to engage in these other activities. And that's really just been like being rewritten for me in my own consciousness going through this chapter. And it's just like a weight off your chest. Like you're just like, oh wow, like okay, yeah, then I want to engage in these things because they're gonna make me feel better, and I know it'll awaken my true self. Like that's what I want in life. So
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Even in the way Krishna teaches, it's not ego-centered. Sometimes we use that ego to control other people. Like, you're going to be bad if you do this. If you do this, you're not good. If you do this, you're not accepted. It's like, which it's like trying to teach these universal spiritual principles in a material way, because then you're so caught in your ego. Maybe your ego's not so elated, but your ego's the other side of that coin, right? You're feeling bad about yourself. You're fear-based. It's that fear-based control. But that's
yeah,
not what Krishna's teaching here. He's saying, this is your vehicle. This is your default mode. This is what you can do about it. I love you no matter what, and I'm here.
yeah,
That's it. And it's so nice. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like a lot of religions, I think they're like, oh, God will turn away from you. But this is the complete opposite. It's like, no, actually, Krishna is always with you. It's just a matter of if you want to awaken your consciousness and realize he's with you or not.
Yeah.
That's like, it's just such a beautiful concept, one that I hope to realize more and more.
Yeah, it's so scientific. I love how the Gita is so scientific in its presentation like that. This is material, this is matter, this is spirit, this is the difference. This is how one will interact with the other. This is how your senses will impact your soul. It's just beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Nicole, please share with us.
Hare Krishna. I'm so grateful for this Sangha. Like I'm like hearing the summary and like hearing, especially Mariah, what you were just sharing. Like I'm so filled with joy right now. It's so sweet. I have a question really. I was wondering if you can tell me more about what is the intelligence? Because we talk about how like the mind can be controlled by the senses, and then there's the soul and Krishna in the heart, but like how does the intelligence, what is it? And yeah.
Yeah, the intelligence as defined by the Gita. Now, intelligence we use kind of broadly in our culture, somebody who's maybe very scientifically minded or knows a lot, will say they're really intelligent, which is true. But the way that the Gita talks about intelligence, it's understanding the difference between matter and spirit, and the controller of both, and the relationship between both. Because the more that you can understand this and realize this, the more that you'll exhibit some of these yogi that we talked about in the last section extensively. And this is what real intelligence is. It's being able to, we talked about when you go, between association that's going to pull you up and pull you down. And between, if you're really pulled by that last, or if how much alcohol pulls you, or how much this sense is pulling you in this direction. That's real intelligence, being able to understand matter and spirit and the difference and the relationship between. And the idea is, we have our sense objects, and then we have our senses, and we have our mind, intelligence, soul, all in a row. And the sense objects pull the senses, And then the mind starts to think, oh, these things are what's going to make me happy. This is what's going to make me happy. It's going to make me happy to go to the bar and drink until 2 a.m. That's fulfillment. That's happiness. And if the intelligence is corrupt, if the intelligence is hijacked, we used this word a couple of days ago, the intelligence is hijacked, it's going to just go along with the mind and think, oh, that's what's going to make me happy. And then the soul sitting right here is going to get pulled in. And the soul is going to start thinking, that's what makes me happy. The soul is going to get covered by all of these material attachments, material delusions. So that's why this intelligence, it can be kind of like a stop. It can be kind of like a filter for the mind and the sense nonsense, that pull the senses pull the mind because that's just the nature of the mind. The intelligence can be kind of like that filter, and it can discern between what is actually upgrading to the consciousness and what is actually degrading. And we can purify the consciousness through our spiritual practices, through connection with God, through learning this spiritual wisdom, through singing kirtan, through chanting. Krishna will reveal these things to us if we're sincere. And in that, we can better discern and we can uncover the soul. And that's the point of this life, right? We're on a multi-level spiritual evolution journey of spiritual evolution to uncover the soul, because the soul for so long has identified with the mind, has identified with thinking, what will make me happy is a better job, more money, a hotter body, a better boyfriend. The soul gets tricked into thinking that if the intelligence isn't there to tell it differently. And so when we say intelligence and knowledge, this is what this is what we're talking about. This is why the intelligence is so crucial, because it can make all the difference in one's life between spending an entire lifetime or millions of lifetimes chasing these material opulences or sense gratification that we think will make us happy, or connecting with God, evolving, upgrading the consciousness. And that's why it's so pivotal, this intelligence. So does that make sense, Nicole?
Yeah, totally. Like it's our in this like incarnation that we have, it's like our ability to be situated in knowledge and discern.
Yeah. Yeah. It's to understand these concepts. I said this is scientific because it is. The body, the mind, the soul. We talked about the Paramatma and the soul, that they're separate. There's a super soul in the heart. There's a soul in the heart. The super soul is God in the heart. And then the soul is part and parcel of God. We each have a soul, and that's what carries on to each body. And if it's covered, depending on how much your soul is covered, like in this life, if you're pursuing low gratification, something that's really low, like intoxication, or if you're, maybe a sex addict, something, you'll get a body that's conducive to that desire in your next life. And with that body, like if it's an animal body, may not even have the capacity for spiritual realization. So we have to be really careful if we're making decisions to downgrade the consciousness, because that's not only going to affect us in this life, and we've seen that. Some of us have been to those places really low, been to some really low places where we've chased those sense gratifications to the point where we've hit rock bottom in this life, right? And that's kind of what's propelled our spiritual journey. But if you don't get to that place where you can start to evolve your consciousness in this life, you could potentially get a lower body, because in the same way that, like, if I'm really into lifting weights at the gym, I'm going to build muscles, and then my body's going to be conducive to lifting weights. But if I stop lifting weights, I'm going to get really scrawny. In the same way that, like, whatever you're doing with your body and your consciousness, your next body, your soul's going to pick something that's conducive to that. Oh, you really like to enjoy food? That's your number one priority in life. Let's come back as, maybe an animal that just loves food. Because what else you don't need capacity for anything else. You just love food. We'll just give you a body that's conducive to that. But that's where we get caught, because there's no capacity for spiritual realization in some of these lower bodies. And so we have to be careful. Where realization comes with that capacity for intelligence. Does that make sense? Beautiful. Thank you. Somebody else had their hand up. Todd had his hand up. Todd, I'm not letting you get away that easy. Todd, you're on mute.
Okay.
Great.
Well, you may have covered it. Yeah, I was just appreciating some of the stuff, because as I go through things, um, things with like attachment and detachment, and like kind of like this cycle of like detaching, and then the attachment comes back, and just trying to figure out, trying to make sense of the order of things that are happening. Like there's this one, I don't know if it was like a therapy method where it was like thoughts come before feelings. So you're thinking something and then you feel, and I'm trying to determine like these things that I'm feeling, if I have strong feelings, like are these thoughts, are these things like ego, or if there's things that you love in life, like is that ego? And just everything's like a little bit muddy when I'm trying to look at it myself in a personal situation. I mean, what I do see is the attraction, like behind something, the love of being God. Like I'm attracted to the God in the situation. Um, so I can see that, but when it comes to things in the heart, it's like it gets a little tricky for me to figure out.
Hmm. And some of these desires that we have, that we try to figure out how rooted in the ego they are, it's also okay. Like that's where we're going to be right now. We're mostly rooted in the ego, and our desires are going to be rooted in the ego, sometimes more than we even would like to admit. But that doesn't mean we also just can't turn them off, right? This is why it's a process. Bhakti's a process where if we can spiritualize whatever it is, we can become purified in that way. And that's what the process is. Like you just baked this halava for your family for Thanksgiving. And I was talking to Todd last night, and he was telling me that he was going to a picture. So he sends me this beautiful picture with, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but with Krishna, and he's offering it. It's a beautiful picture of him offering it to Krishna. So nice. Now, you're also bringing it to your family meal, and you're hoping that they'll like it, right? There is that hope in you. And because this is natural, and this is okay. But there's a chance that they won't like it, right? There's a chance that you'll show up and nobody will like it. And you'll notice in that moment that you feel bad, you feel sad. But you can come back to this point that you as an offering, you really made it as an offering for Krishna, and that's really the real reason you made it. And in that, you can kind of start to purify the ego. You can see, okay, maybe it's okay that it wasn't as popular as I thought it would be, because I made it for Krishna and I know Krishna's happy. And so it's like both. Everything's going to be a little bit mixed, but this is the process, and this is how we purify ourselves. And it's not like you can just say, okay, I'm not going to do this because it's for the ego. It's like, okay, how can I put Krishna at the center of this? And in it, know that I'm going to get that I'm going to get purified along the way. And in that, you'll have so many realizations along the path. And those realizations will hopefully just bring you back to Krishna. But that's the process. So you don't have to just push any desire that you feel is associated with the ego. No, just spiritualize it. Just spiritualize it. I'm doing the same thing with my baby that's coming tomorrow, right? Like I have a lot of desires for this baby, a lot of expectations. But I'm probably going to learn, this baby's probably going to teach me that that's not really the center. The only way to really win is if I make it about Krishna. That's probably what this baby's going to teach me. I know I'm not there yet, and I know I have a lot of lessons to learn around it. But as much as I try to make it about me, I'm probably going to get pushback. And at the end, hopefully, when she moves out and as I evolve in this life together, I'll learn that. And it will just bring me back to Krishna. But that doesn't mean I don't do it. I know that I want to have this child, and the feeling that you have when you hold this child in your arms for the first time, like I am priming myself for that. Like I am so excited. But it's going to be purification. Inevitably, that's what this life is. And if we can, as we're moving forward, do our best to make Krishna the center and continually come back to that, we will be purified and we will make progress. And we'll probably get some satisfaction for our ego along the way, and that's okay because we're getting purified. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody else want to share a highlight from this chapter? I will say my mom, after the last call, she called me. She's like, that call was so heavy. I'm like, why was it heavy, Mom? She's like, you talk so much about how you don't own your kids and how you can't possess them. And she's like, I'm not saying that's totally off, but that's really hard. And you're going to see, how hard that is. I'm like, yeah, I know it's like this, it's like the bittersweet, it's coming because you can't hold on to your kids. You think you can, and then whether or not, they move out, they have their own lives. It's purifying. It's purifying. That's why we're here. And if you don't know that now, you'll learn it along the way. So I get it. I don't get it, but hopefully I will. Mariah, please share.
Yeah, just sharing on like the kid thing. My coworker, her fiance's like mother, she's like, her kids are all in their 30s and she still can't let go. Like she still wants to micromanage their whole lives. And it's so interesting to be able to like see it. Cause I mean, I see it in myself. Like obviously when your child's young, you kind of have to micromanage them. But as they get older, you got to like learn to lessen it. And it's just like, you can see how some people, they stay so attached. But it's so interesting because that attachment actually creates animosity between them, whereas like the more we can learn to detach from that and allow them to be their own selves and appreciate them for who they are, then like it's actually a deeper love than like trying to control and be that micromanaging, like you have to be a certain way for me to love you. And it's like, no, that's so like not right. But so many people do think like that, and it is hard to like change your consciousness of like, yeah, let them go, let them be to some degree. Like you still have to give boundaries, but yeah, it's
yeah,
but it's heavy. It gets heavy. Like you're gonna, it's constantly like, I'm sure I'm still learning. Like there's so many more levels for me to learn on that too. So I hear you on that.
Yeah, I love how and what you just said is an example of that transition from ego-based love, where I'm making it about me, I'm the center, to if you really want to have a real good relationship with your kid, you have to love them like God loves us, in that spirit of detachment. Like when they get to that certain age, like whatever you do, I love you no matter what. That's where you have to get. You can't hold on or you're going to ruin that relationship. Like this is the way God teaches us anyway. Whether or not you're into this, you're going to learn. Hopefully,
Right.
you're going to learn. Brittany.
So I just want to piggyback on that because I am on the recipient end of a parent who is like that. And I'll be honest with you, this conversation has been so personal for me that I haven't been able to share much because I'm in it right now. I'm like in the super painful parts of having a parent who is incredibly overbearing, who has a lot of expectations for me, and when I don't meet them, she has no issues letting me know that I am the source of all of her suffering and troubles. So I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes when we're in it, it's hard to see through the pain of all of it. It's hard for me to speak on this right now because I'm in the middle of having the realizations of what it feels like to be on the recipient end of that. I'm learning how to set boundaries for myself. And one thing that I've realized through our conversations in this chapter is how much of my operation in this relationship is actually ego-based. So I continue to show up time and time again because my ego wants to be a good daughter. Like, I want to be able to say that I've figured this out. I figured out how to handle this person. I figured out how to be a good daughter, how to have a spiritual practice, how to but the truth is, that's very ego-based because it is not, I actually spent like the past 2 days since that class just journaling everything that I could think of with this, like anything that was coming to my mind. And one thing that came really clear to me on what's important in a relationship is safety and feeling empowered and feeling safe. And I feel neither of those things in my relationship with her. So what is it that keeps me wanting to hold on to it? I just had a big realization on ego, and I wish I could say more and had more realizations for you guys on it. But to be honest with you, I'm like in the thick of it, where the pain is just so front and center. It sort of just hijacks my whole life, and I'm learning how to redirect my attention towards God, how to process that, and then how to stand on my own 2 feet. So I don't know what else to say other than I think it's nice to just speak up. I'm sort of choke on my words when it comes to the situation, but you guys have been incredibly helpful for me in this realization, and just being here has been incredibly helpful for me. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you for sharing such a vulnerable share. I shared with Brittany, I went through a similar, well, I don't know if it was similar, but I went through a falling out with my dad, actually, when I got into this practice, and he had a lot of terrible things to say. I think he even told me he was going to take a lien out on my house, which I didn't even know what that meant. I had to like Google it. It was like, but those kinds of things can be so painful. That attachment to our family, to like, I wanted a relationship with him so badly, and I knew what I wanted it to look like. And it was like, if you just let me just listen to me, Dad, we can get to this relationship that I know we both want. But then it's like accepting that, like, that's never going to happen. That it's just never going to happen. And that has to be okay. You have to be more like afraid of, you have to be okay with maybe that relationship just being what it is. And it's so difficult. Yeah, the ego really wants to control. The ego really wants to say, I know what's best and let me show you. Sometimes just accepting, like, no, I'm not the controller. For whatever reason, this is the arrangement, and best I can do is just be true to myself and represent myself in a way that is good for my consciousness, set up boundaries that are good for my consciousness, because that's at the end of all this, that's all that I have. Those relationships, they're going to go, and you're going to be sitting here with your consciousness. So how can we best protect it and move forward in whatever that means for the relationship? It could mean some distance. It could, whatever, we have to figure out what it means for each relationship, but it can be such a struggle. I have so much love and compassion for you. Thanks for sharing, Brittany. Trevor, please share.
First of all, I'm grateful for you having this platform. Grateful for everyone that comes and creates this portal of awareness. It really gives a boost of light in our lives and on the planet. And the shares as well. Grateful for the shares. Are always very beautiful and helpful. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Nicole asked. I just wanted to give what makes it easy for me to understand the difference between mind and ego is the mind likes to think, but the intellect knows. The intellect knows. And Prabhupada would always say that there's a lot of people on the planet like that think they're great scientists and great scholars, but they only have the capacity to be clever. If you're not able to become conscious of yourself, self-realized, then they only have the capacity to be clever. The intellect, they have no access to it. So it's actually access through our hearts. So that when we're learning, that's why it's so much easier to learn when you're enjoying something, because you're open to the energy behind the intellect with your heart, and then it downloads in your intellect as a byproduct. What Todd and Brittany said was very relative, because it can be difficult sorting out the difference between what the ego is attached to and what Krishna wants through the details of the material situation. What makes it easy for me to understand the difference is that there's only actually one relationship that's happening through the illusion of variety in this world. So and it goes the same for anything that you're attracted to in this world. When Krishna says, I'm the taste of water, I'm basically the essence of life, what we're actually looking for, what we're actually enjoying when we're doing anything, or when we're engaging in any kind of relationship, we're actually enjoying Krishna through it. So when the more deeper we realize that, then the better our relationships can be, and Krishna will get creative with you so that you can enhance those relationships. Like Brittany and like you said, Radha, you have, and not everyone I'm sure can relate. We have people in our lives, whether they're family or not, that give us great difficulties. That's Krishna's creative way to get us to learn certain qualities, like very difficult lessons like boundaries and protection, because it's like Arjuna was having trouble figuring out these lessons as well. But they're hard lessons to learn. I've had people in my family give me really hard times, and to be able to set proper boundaries, you got to do things that kind of hurts. It hurts when you're creating that distance, but it's so necessary. It's hard when you're going through it, but you'll thank yourself after the fact, and you'll find out they'll be doing a lot better. You'll be doing a lot better with that distance and the boundaries set. Healthy energetic boundaries are very important. And yeah, and you can still love these people, but up close it's kind of hard, and you can forgive them, but up close, while they're causing you so much aggravation, up close, it's hard for you to fully forgive someone that's causing you so much pain and aggravation. So that distance is important for you to manifest that forgiveness, for you to be able to send love to that being. It's important to have the boundaries and the protection.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, because only if you feel safe and comfortable can you really extend real love and compassion.
Yeah.
And I actually feel like I got there with my dad finally, because I was able to actually communicate and stand up for boundaries in a way, like he's an alcoholic, like, okay, sorry, you can't stay at my house anymore. Like, it's just too volatile. But, and now he respects them, because we've gone through a lot of things, but now I feel like I can actually love him on a whole different plane, on a whole different field. Like, I don't love him because of what he does or doesn't do for me, because that's unpredictable and frankly usually doesn't come out in my favor. But I love him as a soul. That's it. And it's actually very, very purifying in itself. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's good to
Thank you.
hear. Thank you.
Okay. Gold. Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny. This is where relationships teach us this, the good ones, the bad ones. Yeah, thank you. Michael, do you have anything you want to share before we go? Michael's here. Michael's my special friend, and he's hardly gets to be here because he's a teacher. But I'm so happy he's here today. You're on mute. No, he doesn't want to share. Michael doesn't want to share. Okay. We love you, Michael. Does anybody else want to share before we leave for the day? Maybe watch the parade? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. And this was a wonderful journey through the first 2 chapters. And stay tuned on the thread for the schedule for the upcoming weeks. And thinking of all of you today in such a wonderful way to spend this first hour of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Haribo.
Haribo.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Haribol.
So much.
Aw.